I'm Stephanie.
Hi, I'm Angela.
We are the Ink Mages. Join us as we discuss all things fantasy, world building, storycraft, myths and legends, and of course, our own imaginative stories. Welcome to the Ink Mages podcast. It is spooky month, and we are super excited that it is because today we are going to be talking about monsters. Why we love monsters, why we write about monsters, what allures us about monsters. So, Angela, talk to us about what is your favorite classic monster?
You know, there's something about monsters that are just kind of fun and alluring. And, particularly you start talking about the classics like Dracula or zombies. And it's funny, when I was growing up, some of my dad's favorite movies were the old classic vampire movies. And there was something about the mystique of Dracula in a mansion, kind of rich and wealthy, immortal, and seducing all of these women, so he can drink their blood. But then, of course, there's the chosen one that he wants to make, a vampire forever. And
Yes.
it just kind of makes for a fun type of monster that has been written and rewritten throughout the ages. I mean, we have so many variations even now, vampire movies, vampire stories. We've got comic book vampires. We've got romantic Twilight vampires.
Yes,
we have
glitter.
Yes, yeah, that glitter, we've got the good vampires and the bad vampires. And obviously people are, there's something that draws people to that kind of monster that you can kind of create and recreate. You even have like your more modern takes of vampires, like in the Supernatural show, and what maybe, you've got the garlic and the crosses and the holy water, and they can't, be out in daylight. But now with some of the new incarnations of vampires, you have ones that can be out in the daylight and can be vegetarians or whatever they are. But it's so fun to create a fun, mysterious monster. But I have to say, some of my favorite monsters, classic monsters, are zombies. And I don't know what it is about them. They're scary, they're freaky, but they're also really fun, especially when you watch some of the old 80s movies that are so cheesy. I think one of my favorite, I can't really watch scary movies. I'm not really a scary movie type of person, but I do like a good monster movie every now and then. And one of my favorites is Shaun of the Dead. I don't know if you've ever seen that movie, but
I haven't.
It is hilarious. And it's a really fun take on your classic zombies, infiltrating a town in England. And
okay, now I can see why you like
right, England,
England, yes.
Simon Pegg, you get some really good humor in there.
Hilarious, yes.
And it's just cleverly written. And I think you've got so many, actually, especially when we're talking about monsters, cleverly written monsters, like even the book Warm Bodies, where you've got this zombie who is kind of slowly coming back to life because of love, and it's actually starting to bring other zombies back to life again. And
did you read that book or just see the movie?
Yeah, I actually read the book. I was interested in reading it, and the movie was a lot of fun.
I've not seen it. My husband said that we should watch it sometime, and I thought, I didn't know what it was about, but
yes, it's super fun. It's about a zombie that falls in love.
Okay,
and
I like that.
it's funny, it's quirky, and I think that's the fun thing about monsters is they can be scary and kind of give you a thrill, but you can also do things with monsters that make them interesting, intriguing, give them humanity. You can twist the story on a monster and almost make them into something that you care for, you're cheering for. And that's definitely something that happens in the movie Warm Bodies, where you have this zombie that for whatever reason, all of a sudden his brain activity starts coming back to life because he sees this girl. And I remember I wanted to read the book because I'd heard the book was clever and fun, and it certainly was. So if you want a fun, quick read, because it is a very quick read, once you start reading it, it's very hard to put down.
Okay.
Yeah. And it definitely, it's like one of those books you could read in 2 or 3 days. You pick it up, you read it, and it was fun. I haven't heard about, there is a series. I haven't heard a lot about the rest of the series, but the first book was a lot of fun. But I like that you can kind of create a fun monster. And I think with zombies in particular, I used to really like watching zombie movies. 28 Days Later was one of my favorite zombie movies. But something happened, I think, after I got married and had children. I can no longer watch zombie movies. I used to love them. But now that protective, like mama bear instinct,
Mhm.
in whenever I watch anything about zombies, and all I can think of when I go to bed at night is how to plan for the zombie apocalypse in case it actually happens, and how I would save my children and keep them safe from the zombies. And so I actually can't watch them anymore. But they're a fun kind of monster that you can actually do a lot with in storytelling.
Well, okay, just to add to the zombies, I was not a huge zombie, enthusiast or anything, but I have seen a couple movies, and I think it's because growing up I watched my brother play Resident Evil.
Oh yes.
So I don't gravitate toward playing scary games, but I'd watch him play so I could feel that tension and let him just kill the zombies. So I did see like the Resident Evil movie. I saw World War Z. I guess I Am Legend could maybe be considered a zombie movie. But
it is definitely.
I did play Last of Us, which was a zombie apocalypse game, and that was I don't know. I couldn't do it on my own. I played it with a friend, and it just pumped. My blood was pumping every time I had to encounter zombies, and you had to be strategic with how you killed them. So it was a fun game, but like, they scare me.
Definitely gives you the creeps. Yeah, the jump scares.
Yeah, one of my favorite classic monsters would be Frankenstein. Yes.
Classic to the max.
This book, I was so excited. I went into Barnes and Nobles and they had a whole shelf of like classic books that were like 2 for $10. So
oh, nice.
I got this beautiful book for like $5 and it's got like illustrations in it.
Oh wow.
So I'm super excited.
I love books like that. Super book nerd.
Super excited to read it. But I've never seen like the classic Frankenstein movie that I think has maybe Dracula in it. But my first exposure to Frankenstein was Wishbone.
Oh my gosh, wow.
Yes, okay, so I was probably watching Wishbone from like 1st to 4th to 5th grade. My younger sister Liz and I loved the show, and that's how we learned about all the classic literature. And the Frankenstein episode stood out to me. And so kind of talking about that warm bodies main character where you have a sympathetic monster. As a child, I was so sympathetic to the monster. Yes. Because I thought he didn't ask to be revived and brought back to life. This scientist decided I'm going to, bring something back to life. And all these body parts, spliced together to create this monster, and you just feel sad for him because he's alone. He's this only creation. No one else like him exists. And so I think at one point he wants Dr. Frankenstein to create a bride for him. So there's a little bit of a love angle there. So the story of Frankenstein is dark, very interesting. I just love that whole science melding, with technology, creating things that shouldn't ever happen, bringing something dead back to life. And certainly it influenced my Heartsmith steampunk book that is coming out next October, the beginning of spooky month 2024. And I won't say I have like a Frankenstein monster, but I do have a scientist who's trying to bring the dead back to life. And we're not quite sure how he's doing that, but he has created revenants, which are like undead zombies, basically. So here's someone who's not super into zombies, but I have a story with basically zombie kids.
The idea of Frankenstein and even zombies is if someone was reanimated, it's kind of like the whole robot sci-fi scare. If something were to have a level of intelligence but no soul, what would that look like? It kind of answers those questions that we all ask about what would happen. And that's where Frankenstein is so clever, is it dives deep into Frankenstein, who's the doctor, whose family his spouse, they've died tragically, and he wants to find a way to bring them back. And he manages to create this monster, but it's actually a really sad story about this monster who's kind of soulless, but kind of lost, really dangerous, capable of anything. But it's not his fault, and he kind of doesn't know what's going on the whole time. And then the question remains, and this is what's so classic and so fun about the whole spooky concept of reanimation, was who was the real monster, the doctor or the monster himself.
Yes.
And your book, definitely, I know I got to be a pre-reader, beta reader for your book, and it was super creepy and super fun. Just the kind of the mystery and the unfolding, and I don't want to give any spoilers, but just that concept of someone twisted enough in their head, or with the right kind of motivation for whatever reason, to start operating on bodies and finding a way to reanimate them. It's just another level of creepy and monster, but it's also intriguing, and it makes you want to keep reading.
Yes, I think that's the key component there. Is it's an intriguing story. We want to uncover,
yes,
what's the madness behind someone who's driven to do this, because motivation can be simple and it makes sense in their mind, like their reason and rationale, but in a way it is a type of madness.
Yes. Well, and what's kind of interesting, with Dracula, he's the villain for sure. But a lot of the time when we're talking about the monsters themselves aren't usually always the villain. There's usually someone behind, like I'm reading, it's funny, I talk about Lockwood and Company a lot because I'm in the series. Like I've almost completed the series, but I'm almost there. But you've got all of these paranormal, scary ghosts, which again, here's another classic monster. You've got ghosts and wraiths and things like that. But they're not really the villain. It's the people behind. There's something behind all of this that's making it occur. So the monsters are the manifestation, but there's always a villain or something else that could be behind the whole idea of the monsters themselves, which can make them another level of fun when you're writing them.
So with writing monsters, I know you mentioned a wraith. So kind of tell us about the wraith that is in your stories.
Yes, I have. All of my monsters are inspired by real Celtic mythology. So monsters that existed in mythology. And then, of course, I put my own twist on them. And one of them is the CHRONICLES. That's a mouthful, but it is.
I don't want to know how it's spelled.
It's essentially a wraith, and I had so much fun writing this monster character. It was creepy. The whole idea of the wraith, it's kind of a combination of bones and antlers and ghosty spectral whorls and shadow. But essentially it's kind of a reaper of sorts. But my wraith is guarding the dead, essentially, and can take the dead and starves for life, to take life. And it's hungry, and that's what it eats. And I remember writing this scene with my characters and this monster kind of being introduced onto the scene. It was honestly, one of the most creepy scenes for me personally.
It was creepy to read. I was like constantly getting chills.
Yes, and I had to create this monster. I know a lot of writers, they'll do mood boards and kind of get an idea for what maybe their characters look like. And so I had to do that for my CHRONICLES. And so I was looking up all of this Celtic mythology ideas of what a wraith and CHRONICLES look like. So there was kind of a combination of a banshee and a wraith and this Celtic monster. So I had all these images that I had pulled up to kind of help me create this, what I wanted my monster to look like in the end. And you've got this just hissing shadow monster that's clicking and made of bones, rising up to threaten my characters. And the whole the scene is, how are they going to get out? They can't get past this wraith. There's really not a whole lot they can do against its power, its spiritual authority in that place. And it wants a life. that's the setup of the scene is, you can get out, but you have to give up a life.
Mm.
It wants to take a life. And which again, it just creates the whole tension of death in a scene with characters that you love is definitely a nail biting
Oh, yes.
experience.
It was a total nail biting scene. And okay, there was a sound it made. Did you just explain the sound that it made? Like constantly throughout the scene and the dialogue, it would just make this weird, I don't know, sound, and it would make me be scared.
Yes, it's funny because as writers, we have these, we're imagining our creatures. And this is one I had to actually take a break from every now and then because I'd get really into it. And I'm like, okay, it's time to take a break. But I could actually hear it in my head,
Oh.
like as I was writing it. And so I was imagining this wraithy monster that moaned as it spoke and hissed as it spoke. And kind of this whispery, hazy, almost otherworldly voice. But then on top of that, it's made of bone. So I had this idea of, it making the scraping sounds as it would move because it was in the setting of my story in this scene is inside kind of a stone cavern or cave. And so every movement it makes, it's scraping the bones on the floor, it's scraping as it moves. And then as it's moving, even its body, the bones are clicking together.
Oh, that's right. The clicking.
Yeah. And so it was always making this clicking, clattering sound that's very nightmarish. But honestly, it was super fun to write.
Oh, yeah. So that was book 2, Merlin and the Magic of Time, which I got to definitely help work on that. So I enjoyed that scene even as much as it creeped me out. So I feel like your wraith in that story is kind of similar to my moonshades in the sense that these are monsters that crave a life.
Mm-hmm.
They're made of bones, but kind of not really at the same time because they're like formless, nebulous gas is their true form, but they're constantly seeking flesh to devour, almost like a zombie. Okay, there it is again. But when I was creating these moonshades, and so they appear, I think they appear in the Conjurer's Curse and then in my adult fantasy series, I wanted to create a monster that was kind of a twisted version of my shapers. Yes. So my shapeshifters. And so my shapeshifters have the ability to, unlock their bones and shape into a certain form. And so each tribe shapes into a different animal form. And so the moonshades are kind of just a aberration, abomination of that. So there's almost this madness, jealousy that they have for the shapers because they were designed with this ability to shapeshift.
Oh, interesting.
By their creator. And the moonshades want that, but they can't.
Wow.
So, yes, I know. That's a little bit more than you get, in the Conjurer's Curse. It's just like, oh, there's moonshades that attack from the forest. But it goes so much more in depth in my adult fantasy series.
And they're huge and they're giant.
They could be big
because they're collecting.
They're collecting bones. So it just depends on what bones they've assimilated. If they've come across like a huge bear or like a drawl, which is kind of like a minotaur in my world, like they might get huge horns and like stand up on 2 feet. And then you have ones that have assimilated the bones of maybe a feline creature. So they move super fast, but they're small. And I think in the 3rd book in the series, I do have moonshades that fly.
No way. Yeah. Oh, that's going to be so cool.
That kind of tells you maybe what bones they have acquired. Yeah. So at first, when I was creating these monsters, I didn't have a name for them. So we're going like 9 years back in time. I kind of had an idea of this gaseous, nebulous creature that emits almost a sulfur smell.
Yeah.
Like just rotten egg, rotten flesh, because they're devouring flesh and trying to like adhere it to their bones. So it's like dead flesh. Wow. So it's not going to smell good.
Yeah.
They have white eyes like the moon. So I kind of had that moon word already, but this is a funny story. I was in the car with my older sister, Tori, and my nephew, Max, who was probably not even 2 years old at the time. But my sister's a huge Cat Stevens fan.
Oh, yeah.
And so there's this song called Moon Shadow.
Yeah.
And I don't even know the lyrics, but it's like something, something, moon shadow, moon shadow. And my little nephew's in the back singing the lyrics to the chorus. And I thought, moon shadow, moon shade. Ooh.
Oh, that's cool.
So that's where it came from. So I owe Cat Stevens.
Isn't that fun? Was there anything particular that inspired the moonshades when you were writing them? Like something that kind of made all the pieces click together?
Okay, so again, I'm a big video gamer. And my favorite video game, okay, so I love Zelda. So Ocarina of Time is one of my favorite video games. But Shadow of the Colossus is a game I will replay multiple times. And it's a hero character whose like woman he loves has been somehow cursed and she's passed. And so he goes to this forbidden land to try to see if he can bring her back to life. So he makes a deal with this deity entity that if he kills all these colossus that have been, locked away across this forbidden land, that they will return her soul back. Oh, wow. So in this game, you're just this single guy with a sword, a bow, and your trusty steed. I think his name is like Eros. So he's like, Eros, when you call your horse. And so they're just these giant creatures. Some of them fly, some of them walk on two legs. They're just massive. And you have to scale these colossus creatures and kill them. So when I was describing the movements of these moonshades, I remember being this character having to scale up these monsters, and they're thrashing, wow. And they're bucking their head and they're trying to throw you off. So especially in that first book, the Clash of Kingdoms with Krell, okay. when Krell is having to attack some of the moonshades.
Oh my gosh, some of those scenes are so epic.
I was just imagining him as, trying to get on their back and tussling with these monsters that have a nebulous aura around them, and you have to get down deep to that core to try to, kill them. But then they can't be killed. That's the whole thing. Yes. They're soulless.
Yes.
Kind of, like the zombies. They don't have a soul. So that's another thing that they covet. They covet bone, flesh, blood, wow. and a soul. So it's they secretly want to be human, but they're not. So
wow,
it's kind of sad, but no, not really, because they're vicious.
They're monsters, right? They're not the ones you have compassion for. They're the ones that you run from. I know the pieces that I've read with the moonshades, especially with Krell, there's a couple scenes where he fights them. I am freaked out the whole time because the whole time you're thinking, how's he going to get out of this? Even as an amazing warrior, these things can't be killed. There's times where he's having to battle more than one, and you're like,
4.
Yes. How is he going to get out of this? Is he going to get out of this? Or if he does, is he going to be, okay.
Wounded, scarred.
Wounded, yeah, maimed, who knows? And I think that's kind of good to put in with your creature creating when you're creating a monster, is you want something in your story that's going to make you bite your nails. It's going to make you have to lean in and hope that your hero is going to overcome something that is not conquerable.
Right. It's terrifying.
Yes. I definitely tried to create that a little bit with, I have in book 1, a Gwalgi character. And again, another creepy one. It is a combination. Again, it's Welsh mythology. A Gwalgi is an actual Welsh mythological character. And it is also known in a lot of other mythologies as the night hound or the
hellhound.
The hellhound. Yeah, that kind of concept of this hound that is spirit. It's not physical. And I remember when I was creating this, and I was, again, pulling from the inspirations of mythology, trying to put together my own monster from all of these inspirations. And I ended up coming up with this spirit hound that's actually kind of like your moonshades. It's this spectral form. It's a ghost, essentially, a demonic form that wraps itself in branches, kind of like, and it looks like a wolf. It sounds like a wolf, but it's got this bony, branchy look with this form of like gaseous black vapor that surrounds
Sounds
it.
scary.
And it can't be killed.
Yeah, there
At
you go.
least not in the traditional sense. You couldn't stab it. I have one of my characters at one point. He's battling this Gwalgi hound, which is giant. It's huge, and he stabs right through it with a spear. And the spear just gets stuck in it because there's nothing to it. It's just a ghost.
Yeah.
And it can appear, disappear, and reappear, which makes it haunting and scary as well. That it can just, materialize wherever and whenever. And it also, I think my monsters, I like to put a lot of noise and sound to them. And so for that particular monster, it was always this ethereal howl that was coming from around the corner or down the hallway. You could hear it panting or breathing or coming for our heroes. And that was actually my first experience writing a real monster, was writing the Gwalgi. I had a few other like baddies in the midst of book one, but that one was the one I think I spent the most time developing that scene. Again, this monster that you could just kill or vanquish, like a dragon or something that had flesh and blood that could just be killed or destroyed.
And so that one was definitely more like a creature monster because it didn't talk.
Yes, yeah.
Like your wraith.
Yes.
Yes.
Be more werewolfy, I guess. Well, even werewolves can be a little bit more intelligent, I guess, depending on your your version of the werewolf.
Yes. I know. It was fun with back to my moonshades. Is like in the Conjurer's Curse, you just see them as monsters. But in the other series with Krell, at that time when a few, like his friend and his father and a couple others, mind jump.
Oh, yes.
To the mind of a moonshade, you don't do that. It's
not a good idea.
Madness, but that's when they actually talk. There is some type of intelligence.
Wow. Yes.
And that was fun because that's when you get a little insight into what drives these moonshades. So it was interesting trying to come up with a madness type of speech. Jealousy, we're craving, we thirst, very much like your wraith. And you do such a great job of just presenting what the wraith wants. Like, I hunger, I crave, a life for a life. It just kind of hammers that idea. And I do the same thing with the moonshades in that scene. Like, they hunger for the light of Jiri children, which is the deity in my world. So they know and recognize that there's something special about the Shaper's blood. It emits a different type of light. So their eyes see differently.
Wow.
Blood emits light to them. So that was a kind of cool aspect I threw in there. Yeah.
It's really fun kind of coming up with, when you're writing a monster, like what, again, like a vampire or a werewolf, you have a silver bullet for a werewolf. For a vampire, you've got, depending on your variation, it might be garlic and a crucifix or whatever it is that kills them. There is ultimately something that can be discovered to conquer these beasts, but it's going to take the intelligence of our heroes to be able to figure that puzzle out. And maybe, like when we talked in the villains episode, allowing our heroes to fail a few times before they do figure it out, before they are able to conquer the darkness. Or like even with my particular monsters, both the Kayareth and the Gwalgi, there's something behind them. They're not just acting on their own. There is a villain that's behind all of it, that's kind of releasing this darkness and allowing these monsters to live and exist and to have the authority that they have over our heroes. So ultimately, they're not the source. So it's finding and discovering that out, which makes your readers, again, want to keep reading to hope that maybe your heroes are going to figure it out. Hopefully they will. Hopefully they're all going to survive by the end.
Yeah. And that reveals who the real monster is, because it's the case where these creatures are more like minions.
Yes.
Of this dark, person in the shadows than they were just doing the bidding of the true monster.
Yes. Which is an intriguing idea. Even with when you're talking about zombies, the original idea behind a zombie is virus or humans creating this something that causes zombies to be created. I think when you go back to the 80s ones, it's really just the undead rising out of the graves, something like that. But you've got some of your newer incarnations. I know I wanted to do for my book 3, a little bit of a spoiler, but I have undead warriors in book 3. But I'm really, if you've read my books, you know that I am into Arthurian legend. That's the books are based off Arthurian legend. And in Arthurian legend is the legend of the undead armies. Like that's something you see repeated throughout a lot of Arthurian legend prose, some of the Arthurian legend TV shows. They have the undead that comes, these warriors that drink from the chalice of life.
Really?
And it gives them this undead or unkillable quality. So I knew immediately, I'm like, this is going to be in my books at some point. We're doing this undead thing because this is quintessential part of Arthurian legend. And we're going to have some undead rising up to kill our heroes. And part of my idea with that was that the blood that created this undead army was always tied to a person. Unless you knew who that person was, you couldn't kill the undead army. They would just keep rising and rising again. There was nothing you could do to kill them. You couldn't cut their head off like in a zombie movie, and then they were done for.
If you did, would the head just like regrow itself?
Yeah. Well, I had this idea of kind of the old skeleton idea where they could potentially put themselves back together.
Yeah.
Or if they couldn't put themselves back together, their body parts would crawl around and still try to attack you,
Oh gosh.
Especially if it was like the arms, they could maybe do the most damage, maybe the legs and the head, maybe the head could try to bite you or whatever. But that was that concept that they were unkillable. So as long as they could walk and wield a sword, there's a part in my battle scene where I actually have one of my warriors is actually cutting them up into pieces and throwing the body parts into several different ways, because he recognizes, like, if they can't get to their body parts, at least these ones aren't going to be as much of a threat as the ones that keep, getting back up and coming after us. So
totally off topic, but that reminds me of the One Piece live acting episode with the clown.
Oh my gosh, you're right.
Yes. Just scatter his pieces everywhere.
All those little pieces everywhere. That's so funny. Thank you for joining the Ink Mages. Thanks for joining us while we talked about monsters on this fun month of October. And please join us again. We've got some fun interviews that are lining up really quickly. We'll be airing likely in November. And we still want to do an episode about mythical creatures, which is even more my favorite. I think we're going to have a lot of fun with that episode. So please subscribe, leave us a comment. Let us know what your favorite monster is and maybe why they're your favorite. We'd love to hear. And we will see you next time.